This is the daily writing exercise recorded, day 28, titled Linderberg and Stotler. Two distinguished people from two distinguished families ought to make a great couple, and an even more distinguished family of their own. It was an expectation placed upon Edward Linderberg and Lily Stotler by their parents ever since the two families agreed upon their nuptials the day they were born. The whole deal was discussed and sealed by the heads of their respective families in the hospital waiting room. The Linderbergs had to deal with a financial fallback after the head mother had absconded with the family's fortune and given it to the numerous flings she had had with artists, investors, athletes and everything in between that wanted her money and had the time to give her the attention and pleasure she needed. The head father had problems and flings of his own, which kept him from paying too much attention to the family's finances. Tax reviews and the family's finances spiraling downwards and brought the sordid affairs to light. The Linderbergs' position in society was placed upon the tip of a spear, precariously balanced to see if it would hold or fall off completely. The Stotlers had an equally embarrassed 20 years, although perhaps even worse. Their only son, after having been moved into the armed forces, had been declared a traitor to the nation and was duly scheduled to be executed. The Honourable Scott Sebastian Stotler, however, did not feel much for upholding his family's honour. He refused the honour of the firing squad and fled to Argentina instead, where he remained living as a black spot upon the family's honour. Lily's sister Geraldine Stotler, in the meantime, found herself in the arms of a married man, and openly lived with him in sin. "He gives me comfort," she would tell people. It, however, got so bad that she moved into the man's house whilst his wife and children were still in it, and drove her and her children into a side chamber while she took up with the husband in the marital bed. It was and would be quite a scandal if it weren't completely overshadowed by Scott Stotler's antics. Geraldine's sins were often merely a footnote in the wagging tongues of higher society. That then left Edward Linderberg and Lady Stotler and their planned wedding as the only saving grace of both families. Their marriage was to bring both families together and show that both were still capable of being dignified and worthy of their place in society. The marriage of Edward and Lily was to be the shining beacon by which the rest of the world would be distracted by. Neither of them, though, was very much interested in being said shining beacon. Both instead felt they too had a right to their own scandal, and generally disliked each other to a degree that they avoided each other's presence for most of the past 20 years. The agreement made by their fathers, though, haunted them in everything they did. The people around them made sure to remind them of as much, and the two had to suffer it with a great deal of impatience. Raised to be an investment banker just like his father, Edward Linderberg had a tendency to find himself in places he was not supposed to be in, filled with men that by law had no right to exist. Edward could not help himself, though, and mostly got away with it conscientiously by telling himself it was an experiment. In truth, Edward did not know what he really felt about it all, whether it was truly something he felt, or whether he did it out of some sort of rebellious spirit against his mother, or if he did it out of boredom and a need for excitement in his life. He did not hate women, but also was hard-pressed to name 5 he actually liked. Lily Stotler was not one of them. Lily Stotler, like all women before, was sent to college for the sake of receiving enough of an education to not appear moronic in the face of society, but not enough to appear intelligent or scare off any potential suitor. Her infant betrothal to Edward made no difference in this regard. Much like Edward, though, Lily too was in search for the meaning of her life, and just how far away she could find it away from him and the Linderberg family. She delved deep into poetry and writing, and lost herself in an advice column she was paid to write by a local newspaper. It was not a lot, but Lily enjoyed it immensely, as she pretended to be a man going by the name of Hendrik Henderson, whom in her eyes was much more of a perfect specimen than Edward Linderberg could ever be. Both lived their lives around each other. They attended the same university, an idea sprung up by their families, but had learned to avoid each other and stayed out of each other's way. However, as the day of graduation drew ever closer, both were increasingly confronted by the reality that awaited not a week after their scheduled wedding. It was all happening a lot faster than either of them could imagine. They were supposed to have 20 or so years to come up with a way out, and yet here they both were, not 2 months away from the ill-fated day. Edward had half a heart to follow Lily's brother Scott's example and run off to Argentina. He had heard it was a good place to live, the sort of place no one asked too many questions, and where you were left alone. He could be a farmer or open up his own shop. Either way, it would be far away from the prying eyes and controlling hands of his family. Unbeknownst to him, though, Lily had toyed with the exact same idea. She had even asked her brother what the weather was like in Argentina and whether there was any newspaper there that hired women, and how hard it would be for her to learn Spanish. The two would only come to know of each other's plans as they both set foot onto Argentinian soil and saw each other being questioned by immigration officers on their purpose of stay. The look they gave each other when their eyes met across the terminal was the first time either of them could imagine marrying the other. It was the sort of look of a kindred spirit, one that understood the other's plight, and one that saw the humor in their encounter. They would of course never admit to each other and frowned and rolled their eyes instead. An hour-long verbal fight ensued with a few periods of silence as both were driven to Lily's brother's house out in the countryside. The taxi stopped in front of Scott's impressive-looking home. Edwin and Lily both rushed out of the car and ran up the stairs to the front door, within which Scott was in the process of opening. "Hey, Scott," Edward cried out first. "Can I stay here with you forever?" Lily finished quickly. "Damn it," Edward said. Lily laughed at him. "Too slow. Besides, did you really think my brother was going to pick you over me?" Scott didn't really know what was going on. He hugged his sister and looked confusingly at Edward. "What are you doing here?" he asked him. Edward was slightly out of breath. "Well," he said, his hands resting upon his knees, "I was just, driving by and, I figured I'd say hey and, yeah. Wondered if I could stay here for a while?" "All right," Scott said with a chuckle. "You stopped by, eh? All the way from London? Well, that's sure a coincidence." "And what are you doing here, Lily?" he asked his sister. "Oh," she said, feigning ignorance. "Haven't you heard?" "Heard what?" Scott replied. "I'm moving in," Lily said, her hands on her hips. "Where?" Scott asked, looking around. "Well," Lily said, waving her arms about. "Here." "Here?" Scott said, confused, still not understanding what she meant. "Yeah," Lily said. "About that," Edward interrupted. "Could I ask you for a huge favor?" "What favor?" Scott said, taking a step back. Lily shot Edward an angry look. "Hey, he's my brother, so butt out. Go live with your own brother or something." Scott crossed his arms and watched the two continue the argument they had started in the taxi ride up to his house. "So what?" Edward replied. "Like that means anything anyway." "It does," Lily insisted. "Family comes first, you know." Edward laughed. "Yeah, I can see that clearly in your family. So tell me, how is your sister doing these days?" "And how is your mother?" Lily replied. "Any more tennis coaches she really needs a lesson from?" "Well, at least she's not doing it out in public," Edward reasoned with a stutter. "No," Lily replied as she threw up her arms. "She instead does it quietly without anybody knowing. That is why no one has ever heard about it." "Well," Edward said, "at least I don't need my family's honor rescued." "No," Lily said sarcastically, "but you do need it paid for. Here," she said as she threw a bundle of Argentinian pesos at him. "That should hold you over for a while. Now, leave me and my family alone." Scott had heard enough and felt it was the right time to step in. "All right," he said as he clapped his hands. "I see the wedding is still on." His words silenced both Edward and Lily and directed their flurry of words towards him instead. Scott, however, turned around and went back inside. Edward and Lily followed him as they continued to insult each other and convince Scott that the wedding could not and would not ever happen. No more has been written or recorded. Thank you for listening, and let me know what you think. Goodbye.